For a great cup of joe, there's one thing you should know. Your morning brew can also be playful. Buff Boy Brewing guys make the temperature rise, and you surely feel naughty when you swallow our coffee. If you want some real heat, give your mouth a fine treat. You will want some more, rest assured. Buff Boy Brewing, you can't get enough of.
It's time for The Scribble, your weekly fix of celebrity chats, bizarre stories in the news, and basic random chatter with best-selling author and syndicated radio host Jeremy Bradley. Make sure your seat is in the upright and locked position and your barf bag is securely in place. Here's Jeremy Bradley.
Thank you very much, Larson. Jeremy Bradley here. This is The Scribble. Thank you so much for tuning in. And you know what? It's all about content on the show this week. Content is king, as they say, when it comes to, well, I guess everything nowadays, right? Everybody's a broadcaster. Everybody's a social media star. Everybody's and what do they all have in common? Content. And so maybe you've actually started to realize over the last little while that there's some stuff out there that just doesn't make sense that people find entertaining. What does that say about the audience? What does that say about viewership and the general society interest in things, right? Content, when I first got into broadcasting and publishing, the audience had higher expectations than it does now. I look at some of these videos on Facebook, the short little, like the prank videos and things like that, and then like some of them are also just so badly staged, and I look at this going, first of all, acting lessons would be something you would have had to take years ago. But for some reason, the bad fakeness of it, and not only are like people are buying it, that it's legitimate. And I was like, wow, this is why I kind of avoid social media, and I largely stepped away from broadcasting because I just kind of thought, wow, the audience is just so dumb now. Like, that's what they're entertained by, and these videos have millions of views. And that's people making money off of it, right? I'm just like, wow, I have no interest in producing crap like that. Really, if that's what people are interested in, I'm going to go far, far, far away from content creation. That's totally not what I'm about. I'm not stooping to that level. Yes, that's my opinion of it. I'm stooping to that level if I start, producing garbage like that. Well, that's a good introduction for what we're talking about today, because content is king, and I'm going to talk about how I've done it for the past 20 years in publishing, and I guess it's now about 22 years in publishing, 20 in broadcasting, and it starts on the Scribble right after this.
Isn't it crazy that you wait for payday, but before you know it, you're strapped for cash again? It's time to stop blowing your money and become a smart spender with the book, The Official Guide to Being an American Cheapskate, at cheapskatebook.com. Learn simple ways to cut costs at home every day and during special times of the year. Don't go broke at Christmas. Don't remortgage the house for a fancy vacation. The book is filled with tips to save you money throughout the year. Check out the best-selling book, The Official Guide to Being an American Cheapskate, at cheapskatebook.com or on Amazon and iTunes.
Ever had something to get off your chest but never had the balls to say it? That's a load of crap. Speak Free with JB.com is exactly what you've been waiting for. Your chance to tell it like it is and not care what anybody else thinks. Have your say on issues of the day. Join newspaper and radio columnist Jeremy Bradley as he tells it like it is. Hundreds of thousands of people have stopped by, including some well-known celebrities who have had a chat with JB and speak candidly about what's really going on in the world. You can join them too. Have a rant or a rave. Be brave and head on over to www.speakfreewithjb.com now.
JB here, back on the Scribble. So by today's standards, when it comes to this whole social media thing and quote-unquote influencers, I'm a has-been, and I'm okay with that. I really am, because I found success in broadcasting and publishing when it wasn't something that just everybody could do. And what I mean by that is you had to have some chops, as they said back in the day, when dinosaurs roamed the earth and we were all young. No, I was a newspaper columnist for 20 years, and I had a syndicated radio show for 15 years, and I started it in radio when internet radio was just becoming a thing. Satellite radio was around, but not really common or popular. Well, think about it this way. The fact that listening to the radio on the internet was a foreign concept to most people. Satellite radio was not even it was very, very rare for somebody to have satellite radio at the time. So I get into this industry, and it's really, radio is radio, yes, but I guess the industry would be the same thing. I guess the delivery format of the industry that was new. You had to convince, advertisers or whatever that it's on the radio, but it's not like, in a market. So it's not like New York. It's not like, Los Angeles, because that's what traditional broadcasting, that's what people were used to. When you were trying to get advertisers, when you were trying to get celebrity guests, it was all about what major markets are you in? And you had to name drop. And in this instance, name dropping is cities, right? Or regions or areas. And so, to then go and say, well, no, it's on the internet. So there really isn't a market. Like there isn't really a region per se. People didn't get that. It was just like, oh, okay. Think about it this way. That would be like you going from watching television in your house to then all of a sudden on your phone and then trying to get advertisers for something you're producing, for people watching on their phone. And you're having to explain it's TV, yes, but it's on your phone, so it's like not actually a television, but it's the concept of television, but on an entirely different device. Well, that's what we had to do for internet radio back then. That's truly what we had to do. And it sounds silly now, but yes, we had to dumb it down and basically say it's the radio, but it's coming through on your computer. Again, remember that we didn't have, streaming or whatever on phones. You were listening to, it was an internet connection on your computer. But even then, people just didn't get it. It was almost like, you don't listen to radio on your computer. But that's not it's a thing. Just, so that's when I came up in broadcasting. Okay. And so for me, there was this tough, slugging it out to not only educate people that are familiar with the industry, then trying to get in on the ground level of, is this going to take off? Is it going to be popular? Will people do this? Will people be sitting at their job and, listen to some station from wherever on the internet? And it turns out, yes, they would. They would. And they would do it almost, religiously, I found. So when I was first offered to, the opportunity to write a newspaper column, again, which I did for 20 years, of course I wanted it. So I was ready to take on the task. But my first thought was, okay, you can't really go into this week by week, right? Like I was writing it every Monday. It was going in the newspaper on Wednesday. So yes, you'll have to sort of adapt as you go, right? Because you're going to never have to write about current events, right? If something happens in the news, you're going to comment on that. But you've got to have a backup, because I've got to plan out at least the next month. What am I going to be talking about? What am I writing? What's my opinion? What are my stances? Because as a columnist, your audience is going to start to figure out it depends on what you write about, right? So if you're political, right, it's going to take a while for people to kind of figure out which way you lean, right? If you're a political commentator, then you're going to have your opinions and people will figure it out. So then when they go to you next week, they're going to know that you're about to rip into the politician who you're kind of against or whatever, right? So you have to establish that sort of reputation or that history, that reputation. So for me, I was just a general commentary guy I would have been I wasn't mid-20s. I was still living with my parents. Yeah, very early 20s. I was still living at home with my parents. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to be this young, 20-something. And that's going to be I've never personally been involved in politics. I've never donated to a campaign. I've never campaigned for somebody. I've never been involved at all, ever. So I thought, well, that's going to be kind of my angle, is I'm just this young 20-some guy who has just thoughts, observations about what's happening in the world, right? Or in politics, or in, I was going to be starting on the radio regularly shortly after that. So then I was kind of like, okay, well, I'm going to be doing pop culture and entertainment stuff. So yeah, it was kind of just what's on my mind, and then reacting to things that are in the news, because as a newspaper, you're kind of newsy to a point, right? You can't just be going off on whatever. So that was kind of my first fear was, okay, I don't know how long this is going to run, right? I don't know, because it's not a job. They just contracted me to do this. And if they don't like me after 2 months, then, I could be done, right? So I didn't, I was it was a small community newspaper. So it wasn't like, it wasn't, New York Times or anything like that. But you still have this responsibility because you're attaching your name to it. Like I said, I was just becoming a writer in the industry. I'd been writing for fun and whatever for a few years, since I was a teenager, really. But then this is kind of like, this is my first sort of real paid, regular kind of thing when I'm not in school and I'm on my own now. So I had a bunch of brainstormed sort of ideas, and then just as things would come up in day-to-day life, I'd just write it down on a Post-it and stick it on the wall or on my desk or something. And then if I didn't have an actual subject, that I was responding to that week or, whatever was happening in the world, I would just fall back on those and just kind of do a general sort of a commentary. But to me, it was always about the content. Like, if this runs for an entire year, obviously things are going to happen throughout the year that I'm not going to know about. Sure, it's impossible to plan, an entire year. But where am I going with this? Am I going to find an interest in politics and maybe just do that once a month? So like every first Monday I'll write about politics if there's nothing happening. Like, how do I want to map this out? Now, you could go and say that's really, planning in advance, especially for something in the news industry. But it gave me structure, though. It made me kind of go and say, okay, well, this is what I'll do. Yes, I'll respond to something. If there's an event that happens in the world that falls into my not wheelhouse, because it was more just sort of my interest of opinion, then I'll jump on that. And I found, as somebody who didn't really follow politics, it was actually kind of fun to just sort of watch from the sidelines as a regular voter, as a regular taxpayer, what these politicians are doing. I was kind of like, this is interesting. So being a trained journalist, I'd look at it and go, they're not answering the question, are they? They're saying a lot, but not saying anything at all. And that was kind of my first sort of real look at politics, because there would be a scandal or something on the news, and I'd be like, okay, well, now let me actually listen to what the politicians are saying. And then I'm like, okay, well, I'm watching the press conference, I'm listening to it, and did I miss the answer? Do I have to rewind it and like go back and see? Was I not did I have a stroke and zone out? Did I fall into a coma? What happened? And then sure enough, I'd listen to it again and be like, yeah, they didn't answer the question. All right. So that's stuff that I would jump on. And I realized that, politicians not answering questions, that's nothing new, Jeremy. Like, well, for me, who'd never really paid attention to it, why would I have had to in my teenage years or whatever, right? Teens generally are not interested in politics. So, like, what would it matter? So I carried that on to the radio show. So then when a Vancouver internet station brought me on, I did little weekly things with them here and there, just like one segment at a time. And then they'd offered me the opportunity to host a show. And I said no, because again, I think I didn't really have it. I didn't have something that I was just really interested in. I didn't know what the concept would be. Like, okay, so is it a talk thing? Is it a music thing? Like, what's the deal? And I did have other options when, like I said, internet radio was starting out. There were a bunch of talk stations and things that there was this one company that was going to send me my own computer and I could connect and I would just hit the button and I'd be broadcasting during my time slot and it's great. I'll be part of their network. And I said no. I was like, but I don't. And the reason why was because I'd sit there and go week to week. I couldn't even fill a month. If you gave me like a planner, like a weekly planner, like a day planner, like you have for work or your life or whatever it is, I wouldn't be able to fill out the month. So if I can't do that right now, and yes, things will come up, it'll come along right after you do a couple shows, but then you'll figure it out. You'll get your groove and it's like, okay, well, this is how it's going to go. I've never felt comfortable that way. Just totally going in and winging it. Now, this is maybe why, here's the thing, this is maybe why I have never had a business failure on any of my projects. Because all of them sort of snowballed into the next thing. So it started out in newspapers 20 years ago. That turned into the radio thing. Then it turned into writing books. That turned into publishing a best-selling book. Then it turned into another syndicated radio show. And then another book. And then, so all of my projects have really grown. Nothing has ever failed. And because I've put in the thought, or the brain work, the brainstorming thought work, brainstorming thought work. Write that down, creative people. I'm retired. Fuck off. I don't have to answer these questions. But I've always enjoyed the planning of it, the creative aspect of it. Nobody who works at my company, by the way, and we've had a team that's been together I was talking with Bonnie Winters the other day, how long we've all known each other, and she said, I knew her just before her grandson was born, and he's now like 18 years old, so I've known her for a very long time. And so I said to her, I have to plan and know where I'm going with it. Because if not, then we're not going anywhere. And she always laughed at that. She said, yes, that's one of the things that I remember when I first met you. We were met at a publishing company. We were doing magazines. I was the managing editor. And I had this giant whiteboard in my office. And I had the dates however many magazines I was doing at one time. Sometimes I had like 6 or 7 different issues of different publications. We were a trade publisher, so I had a bunch of different clients. I would have every date. So I would have the editorial planner is due on this date, then the this is due on this date, then the this is due on this date, then the this is due on this date. Just dates and dates and dates. And I think my writers, either they liked that or they hated it, because I was the ball buster. Now, I would also know that once I kind of figured it out, how this whole publishing thing works, is that you're going to have the writers that are basically always going to ask you for extra time. Always going to ask you for more time. And so I would then build that in, because I figured, without them, I'm kind of screwed. So I do really need them, but I can play hardball. So I would have the date that I would tell them it was due. No, we're going into design on this date. Like, it's da-da-da-da. I needed it. Meanwhile, I still had a few days to play with. But I just made sure that this is, I'm not going to tell them the real date. I'm going to tell them it's this, even though I know what it really is. And I only got busted one time when one of the writers actually came in. They were all freelancers, so they didn't work with us in the building. And so one of them was actually visiting time, and he came and as we were chatting, and he looks on the wall, and I guess he just he noticed the magazine that he was writing for. He saw that, and he's like, did I write down the wrong date? And I got busted that one time because I was like, oh, maybe I wrote it down wrong up there. Meanwhile, no, I didn't. So when it comes to the content aspect side of things, again, back to this radio show that they had offered me, and I just said, no, I don't really know where I'm going with that. So then they said, just fill in the one time. It's a 2-hour slot. You just have to come in every, 15 minutes, either introduce the next song, tell a stupid story for a minute and a half, whatever. They gave me a few days' notice, and so I said, okay, fine, I'll do it the one time. I spent hours planning what I was going to talk about. I even scripted every single fucking word. And this is absolutely true. I even wrote in stutters, like ums and ahs, ums and uhs. I literally scripted those in to make it sound more natural. Like I was just talking normally and naturally, but, like if I lost my train of thought, right? I was literally writing it that way. That's how crazy I was when it came to, and then once I had taped, because I recorded a bunch of the segments first, I went back, I would listen to them all too. I would listen to them neurotically and then re-record them. And I thought, I'm going to end up hating this because I'm just ruining the fun in the whole idea of this, right? Radio is not supposed to be scripted. And now it didn't sound scripted. Like when I listen to those podcasts, those true crime podcasts, and the people and they're talking like this. He did not know he was about to. I'm sitting there going, oh my God, get somebody who can just talk naturally. If you can't do that, one of the guys from the radio station, it's since gone way under all these years later, but one of the guys who was there, he couldn't help but go into his radio voice anytime he was in front of the microphone. And I'm sitting there going, dude, I've known you for a really long time. So we can have a conversation on the phone. They're in Vancouver. I wasn't in Vancouver. And we're talking normally, right? He does have a deep booming voice as it is. And then he would come up with just, different segments or whatever it was. Years later, he came up with a podcast. I'll talk about that in a second. And we're still in touch. So he'd sent me one of the episodes and he said, tell me what you think. So I said, okay, fine. And then I hit the play button and it's just like this. If you think that you can get away with something for your entire life, but it doesn't happen that way. So I was kind of like, I just don't like it because he's doing the voice. It's not natural. That's not how he speaks. The whole point of podcasts is supposed to be casual and sort of off the cuff and unrehearsed. And I also hate the podcasts that have the jump cut edits, because as somebody who's been in audio for a couple decades now, I always hate the edits, because you can hear when there's when people do cuts in editing. I hate that. You see it on YouTube videos all the time, right? Where all of a sudden there's somebody, the person will say 2 sentences or 3 sentences, and then there's a cut, but they're still in the same thought. I'm sitting there going, why do you do that? Did you have to record it 3 different times? Did you take out a sentence? Like, it's just something that throws me off, and it's very distracting to me. So when I'm listening to a podcast, let's say I have my headphones in and I'm listening to it very, very clearly, because that's the only thing in my ear at the time, I hate those that are edited that way. And so that's something too where I'm just like, just focus on being a good public speaker. And something that I've said to many people is, just because you have a phone doesn't mean that you should be a content creator. Doesn't mean that you should have an Instagram page where you're broadcasting your life. Just because you're in a relationship does not mean that every moment of your time has to be captured and broadcast. Just because you have a microphone on your computer doesn't mean that you should host a podcast. And that's okay. That's not what everybody's meant to do. So when I'm going back to these days, I said at the top of the show, you needed to have chops to make it in this business. Well, you did, because not everybody had a platform, and the time, or if it, in the case of newspaper, the page space was limited. Only the people that deserved it and were qualified and earned it got the time or the space, depending on the avenue. So that's where I was like, you can call me a has-been all you want, but I had success in it. And that was when you actually needed talent. You needed to be able to, prove it. So going back to this colleague who launched the podcast, and I was very surprised, because he's older and has even more decades in broadcasting than I do. And I applaud him for being interested in podcasting and kind of wanting to try it. But I said to him, he approached me, he called me one day and said, I've got this idea. This is what I'm planning to do. What do you think? And I said, okay, map up. We'll call him Jim. That's not his name, but we'll call him Jim. So Jim, okay, tell me then the first 4 episodes. So this, you've got the concept or whatever. Episode 1 is what? So he basically just sort of regurgitated what he had told me his idea would be, right? That would be the first episode. I say, okay, great. Okay, episode 2. What is episode 2? Well, it's okay. So you don't have episode 2. So do you have episode 3 then? Well, and then he's sort of workshopping it as he's talking to me. And then I thought, I don't know that you've put in the planning that goes into something like this. So I said, you're somebody who used to produce radio shows for however many years that you did on corporate radio. So you really needed to have, especially if you're new, you had somebody that you were answering to who was breathing down your neck. And what are you talking about on my radio station? I'm the program director, so I need to know what you're talking about. And then once you're around for a while, they'll loosen up a little bit. But I said, you would never have not planned this far out on radio shows that you were doing. So why aren't you treating it the same way as for your podcast? Oh, that's a good thought. Good thought with that. Okay, great. And so what is your audience? What's your demographic? So this first one that you told me about, the segment was going to be very politically angled or driven, or whatever word you want to use. And so I said, okay, great. So episode 2 then, as he's workshopping it through the conversation, it was not about politics. And I said, okay, so wait a second, I'm confused here, because you're in Canada and your first segment was about American politics. So are you talking to Canadians about American politics? Are you talking to Americans about American politics? Are you talking to the world about American politics? I'm not quite sure what your audience is. And then he, kind of talks it through, and I said, okay, fine. And then I said, okay, episode 3, or I guess we go back to 2. What's 2? Oh, it's gonna be this. Okay, fine. What's 3? Well, it could be about, this it was very, very hyper regional, his next one, something to Vancouver. And I said, okay, wait a second. So your first one's about American politics to a Canadian audience, but then through the course of conversation, it's going to be to American audiences. So a Canadian commenting on American politics to Americans. Why would any American give a shit about the water quality in Vancouver? Why? Why would they? Why? So you can't be everything to everyone in a podcast. You just can't. You can't. It doesn't work that way. Right? You could say that, well, Joe Rogan has a very defined sort of audience. You could go and say that it's a younger demographic, but it's also older, men. It's also, well, but there's also people that just appreciate his very direct sort of bluntness and his opinions of the world and things like that. I'm not his audience. I'm in my 40s. I'm a white guy in my 40s. You'd think that would be Rogan's demographic. Maybe it is. But my point is that he's not everything to everyone. Unless he starts talking more pop culture and not so aggressive with his opinions and stances on things, he doesn't appeal to me. Right? My parents are in their my dad's 70, but my mom's in her 60s. They would have no interest. Well, they don't have interest in podcasts, right? So it's a little bit different. Then you've got, like I said, this former colleague who's in that age bracket who is interested in podcasts. So, right, it's impossible to be everything to everyone. So I said, okay, episode 4. Where are we for episode 4? Well, okay. Well, let's move on then. How long is each one going to be? Because I've talked about our own show. I've talked about this podcast that it's 30 minutes generally every week. Obviously, the last few weeks we've gone a little bit over because I've loosened up a little bit. I've unclenched my hole. I've loosened up and said, if I want to go 34 minutes, I'll go 34 minutes. How long is each one going to be? 10 minutes? 15? Are you going to have guests? Is it just going to be you? Because you got to have consistency with it. Same thing if you're publishing a magazine. Let's go back in time when people were actually flipping through magazines. You can't do 24 pages one week and then 82 the next week, right? Because it doesn't work that way. So when you're doing a podcast, what's your length of time? How much? So he went away for a couple weeks. He kind of went back to the drawing board, and then he came back to me and started telling me about these other ideas that he had for the same podcast. And I said, okay, well, let's hear them. What are they? And I was actually I was running downtown to an appointment. So he was on speaker as I was going. And I said, okay. So the conversation started just as I was leaving my house. And he started saying, I'm going to have contests where people can submit their kind of one-liner jokes, and I'll have coffee cups made, and you'll win a coffee cup if I use your sort of one-liner on the podcast. And I said, all right, stop, hold on, pause. Okay, wait. So it was a very, very specifically political, sort of thought that you had for the first episode. Now you're incorporating comedy and you want people's one-liners, and if you use their joke on the show, did I miss something? Did I totally blank out on 3 or 4 conversations that we had? How does this... I'm lost. Is it still the same project that we talked about however many weeks ago? I said, I think... what was the name that I used? Jim, yeah. Jim, I'm not saying you can't change your thoughts, the angle or the idea of what your project is, but walk me through that process, though, from the past 2 weeks. Where did we get from the point of that call, the first call, to this point? How did it morph? How did it change? Well, in my opinion, where did it go wrong? And secondly, we had started talking about this. I guess it was in the summer. So let's say July. I don't remember exactly when it was, because I just remember it was very hot when I was talking with him when I was going downtown. So then I said to him, okay, great. What is your launch date for this? I'm not one who, if I have a good idea, I will rush into it and do a lot of the big work. When I started our coffee company, I said to my husband, we're starting and finishing the major planning of it this weekend. And if that means that we don't sleep, we literally stay up. I stayed up for 30 hours straight working on this. And that was because I had the idea, the creativity was going, things were it was great. I got it. We did it. And then we were ready to launch not too long after that. But I'm not saying, we had this idea and launch your podcast tomorrow because it's just, that quick. No. But I'm saying at least think it through. So if the last time I spoke to him, he wasn't able to come up with 4 episodes, I'm fascinated to hear how it's turned into prize giveaways and comedy. So take me through that what was the train of thought here? How did we go from station this to totally different, and something that sounds like it's just going to be a disaster? Now, part of me, because I'm an asshole, is listening to this going, this is delicious. Like, this is going to crash and burn and fail miserably, and I kind of want to watch that happen. Because here's the thing. If you're going to ask me for my opinion and thoughts and insight, and let's be honest, I've had great success in creating content, then at least take my advice. At least listen to it. Why am I wasting 2 hours talking to you and giving you all this insight if you do sweet fuck all with it? Right? So I kind of do want to see you fail. I kind of do. Kind of a little bit, just a bit. So now summer is over at this point, and we have a conversation early fall. I thought that he had just kind of even shelved the idea. They're just telling me to wrap up now. Going back to that whole 30-minute thing and I'm running over, this will be an episode where I'm going to run over because I want to. We'll continue it in the next episode, by the way. But so we have a conversation in the fall, and I said, oh, so you're actually still doing it? Like, I didn't even think that this, okay. I thought it was dead on arrival, because whether he wanted the unfiltered criticism, it was really criticism that I started out kind of supportive, right? Giving ideas. Oh, okay, that's interesting, but what about, have you thought about this? What about doing it this way? What about that? Because I never say to people, you should do this, because that makes me shut down. Because when you start telling me I should do something, that means that you know better than I do, and so why was I coming to you in the first place? Because I'm needing a support on this, which most people will just want to be told that they're right? Oh, you're on the right track. Oh, that's a good idea. And that's what you do. Well, people know coming to me, you're not going to get that. That's just not going to happen. Why am I going to lie to you and say that's a great idea when I know it's going to suck? And then you're going to come back to me and go, well, what does he know? What does Jeremy know? He fucked, seriously. So it's fall now, and he's about to launch. And I just kind of thought, okay, well, let me hear this, let me hear it. If you've been going through life and you've been talking like this and you can't turn it off. And I thought, oh fuck, he's doing the voice. Oh my God, he's doing the voice. Oh my God. So he didn't have a defined audience. And like I said, that I don't know that somebody who's in their early 20s is going to want to listen to the booming voice like this. Maybe people his age, his demographic, 50s, 60s, 70s will listen to that because that's kind of the classic, old school radio voice. But that's just not, especially if you're talking politics, there's not a voice that you could use. Chris Wallace always annoyed the fuck out of me when I would listen to him because his voice is I'm not a good impressionist, so I can't really do the voices. But Chris Wallace's voice was just so. Another one is Craig Melvin on Dateline, or on the Today Show. Well, no, he did Dateline as well. His voice. I just like, clear your throat, buddy. It's too it's raspy. It's something. It just doesn't work for me. So Jim, lose the booming voice. If you're doing something that's a commentary, then talk conversationally. That's what people are going to, especially if it's a podcast. If you're doing something on AM radio on a weekend political show, then this might work for you. Otherwise, no, don't do it. So I totally didn't even cover what we were supposed to cover on this episode of the show. Well, I got through maybe 5 minutes of it because I started talking about content is king. More on content on the show next week. That's where we're going to leave it. What a prime example. Listen to me about content, and I didn't even get to the content. No, I really did. There's just, you got to explain some of these things. And like I said, I've been there and done that. That's how I can have these stories to tell you. I'm not saying there's a right or wrong way to do it. The wrong way, though, if we're being honest, is not planning. Right? That'd be like, I'm going to build a house, but I don't have a plan. But I'm building on Saturday. I'm starting the build on Saturday, but I don't have a plan. So that is technically the wrong way to go about it. Sure. But what I'm saying is, maybe you do like I did with the coffee company. You do a 30-hour work session and you just go through it. There's no stopping till enough. That's how you force yourself. Then great. When it comes to content creation, you have to be consistent. You have to have that structure. Think about when Corona started and everybody who was still having to work but not leaving the house, you heard all these people saying to you, still get dressed in the morning. Get dressed like you're going to the office. Because if you're just sitting around in your pajamas all day, you're going to be, you're not going to be motivated. It's going to, blah, blah, blah. So that works for a lot of people. working from home. Okay, I'm going to get dressed just like I'm leaving the house, even though I'm not. So for me, I will structure the day. So like I was talking about the newspaper column, it's written on Monday. It's not written on a Monday morning because I'm just not a creative person in the mornings. I'm just not. When we would tape our radio shows, when we would have celebrity guests, we generally would do them either late morning or sometime in the afternoon. Because that's when I'm awake, I'm ready to go. Me interviewing a celebrity at 7 in the morning, I mean, I would do it depending on who it was. But otherwise, no, we could, if it was somebody big, sure, I'll make the accommodation for it. But otherwise, no, I'm not doing it. So I'll talk more about content and all the meat and potatoes of content creation coming up on the next episode. But until then, we're out of here. My name is Jeremy Bradley. This is The Scribble. I did the entire show in one shot without even taking a breath. Next week on The Scribble, Content Creation 101. Talk to you then. Bye-bye, everybody.
It's never too early to start thinking about your next holiday. Have you checked out Mexico recently? From tequila tasting, swimming with horses, to ziplining through the jungle and watching whales and dolphins in their natural habitat, Puerto Vallarta has it all. Visit mexico.jbonair.com to see all the fun PV has to offer. That's at mexico.jbonair.com for hundreds of photos, interviews, and videos from around the tourist hotspot. Check out mexico.jbonair.com for all the fun. That's mexico.jbonair.com.
Who are the Kardashians feuding with now? What did that little thug Justin Bieber do this time? Who's getting hitched? And who's headed for Splitsville? Hear the latest celebrity news and gossip every day on Entertainment Wrap-Up. The good, the bad, the ugly, but mostly the ridiculously hilarious. It's all recapped in this daily segment at entertainmentwrapup.com. Have a laugh at the expense of the rich and famous when they take themselves way too seriously. It's 3 minutes of time-wasting fun at entertainmentwrapup.com. Check out Entertainment Wrap-Up at entertainmentwrapup.com. Brought to you by Speak Free Books.
We hear you chirping. Get scribbling. Tweet up the Scribble at The Scribble Show. Join the discussion with Jeremy Bradley. It's all going down right now on Twitter at The Scribble Show and at thescribbleshow.com. Want more Scribble? Check out thescribbleshow.com for past shows, celebrity interviews, cheapskate tips, and more. That's at thescribbleshow.com and on Twitter at The Scribble Show. The Scribble is a Speak Free media presentation.
If you want some real